All right.
Mubandu, how you doing, bro?
Yeah, not too bad. Yourself?
I can't complain, man. I can't complain. I'm pretty sure this is your first time in the Q&A, right?
Yeah, it is. I just want to say, like, first off, thank you to yourself for kind of allowing us to express our views when it comes to the lore. Really, really interesting. Kind of listen to you when I'm working.
I enjoy watching you squirm. You make a fitting sacrifice.
Yeah. We can do this multiple times. So, for example, Hector Howell basically asked all of his questions over the course of like 3 weeks.
I think it's going to be one of those things where I ask questions, but I actually come away wanting to ask even more questions.
It's perfectly fine.
You are not prepared!
Yeah, no, that's great. So I have two questions. I've got kind of a longer one and then a quick fire one. So my first question is, with the new patch that was announced yesterday, I think it was yesterday, it's explained that we're going to be facing Galakrond in the Mega Dungeon. Although I feel like this won't be the last time that we face him, do you think it increases the chances of Galakrond being the last boss? And how do you think he will return? Because there's been quite a lot of speculation about how the old gods are connected more to death than to the Void Lords. And I just wanted to see kind of where your opinion of that was.
The first thing that I'll take is sort of the last thing you said. I don't think the old gods are more connected to death. I think the old gods definitely have a connection to decay. I just have not been able to really figure out what that connection is. Because Ysera is responsible, at least according to the Titans, directly for the creation of Galakrond. Galakrond is like 100% the incarnate of decay. Just 100%. Everything about him was decay. So how did Ysera do this? One or two options. Either the old gods are of decay, or Ysera, when they first arrived on Azeroth, Ysera sort of maybe consumed all of decay, in his initial sort of burst, or his growth spurt. He consumed all of decay for that extra power that it would give him, because if I read the early days of the Black Empire correctly, all of the old gods arrive on Azeroth in a fairly weakened state, and then they start to spread their corruption. And you could imagine that those early years, all of the old gods were sort of willing to consume just about anything that would give them that leg up on the competition, that would make them a little bit stronger. And it is widely accepted that Ysera was the second most powerful old god, just behind Ysera. So I can definitely see that as being a thing, which then sort of leads me to ask the question, did Ysera maybe consume all of Spirit instead of Azeroth? Because the Azeroth consuming Spirit comes from the Titans. The fact that the wound left behind by Ysera being removed from the planet creates the Night Elves, so it has a very clear effect on life around it. Maybe Ysera consumed all of the spirit and wasn't Azeroth, as we were led to believe. But anyways, that's not your question. I just sort of wanted to air that out. So I like the idea of Galakrond not actually being defeated in the Mega Dungeon. In fact, I think everyone would kind of feel a little cheated if Galakrond was just killed in the Mega Dungeon rather than in a proper raid.
100%.
Yeah. The whole thing with Galakrond, though, becomes very interesting, because apparently when we see Galakrond, it's not so much to do with Galakrond, but rather the aftermath of Galakrond. That's really the thing that we're dealing with. So something in what happened after Galakrond's fall is what ultimately Galakrond is sort of trying to set right. Something happened there, and Galakrond is trying to reverse that from happening. But there are so many questions that I have about all of this. For one, is this our Galakrond that is in that timeline? Or is it the Galakrond from that timeline that we're stopping in that timeline? And if it is our Galakrond in that timeline, how did he get there?
Unless he starts making, the minute he got out, he starts doing all of his deals over again. He's famously known for, and it includes the Twilight Dragonflight.
You mean the Infinite?
Or sorry, Infinite.
The thing is, right, and you just hit the nail on the head there. I believe that one of these deals was with Morozond, right? And Morozond called the Infinite. There's a giant. Oh my god, there's so much to talk about with Morozond and the Infinite Dragonflight. They're called the Infinite Dragonflight, and I don't think that that's an accident at all. I think they're called the Infinite Dragonflight because right now, Nosdormu is the Bronze Dragon aspect, and his gifts come directly from Aman'Thul. Aman'Thul famously believes that this is the true timeline. All of the other timelines are sort of fractures that should never have been. This is the only true timeline, and Nosdormu believes in this true timeline. Morozond, being the infinite dragon, suggests something to the effect of finally seeing the thousand truths. So seeing what the old gods see, and then becoming the infinite rather than the one. And now believing that all of these things are true. And I think Galakrond may have struck a deal with Morozond, and Morozond would then have moved him into this timeline back to the original sort of, and we'll have to wait and see, because we don't actually know whether or not we're actually moving on the sacred timeline. Because remember, according to all of the time traveling rules in World of Warcraft's universe, you may move to any other timeline, and you may move on that timeline to the future or the past, but you may at no point move on the sacred timeline, which is our timeline. Not even the Bronze Dragonflight has that right. They cannot move forward or back on the sacred timeline, because according to Aman'Thul, this timeline may never be interfered with. So it's too much of a risk to move back on this timeline, because one small step, you know, the whole stepping on a butterfly, one mistake could change the entire thing, and they definitely don't want that to happen.
With Galakrond specifically, have you got any kind of idea on how you think he could return, like physically, or do you think it will be kind of like a time pocket, or do you think we'll fight him in kind of like the Prime universe?
All right, so I'm gonna do the cop-out thing again and give you the coward's answer, which is there's two fundamental ways that I see it could happen. There are more, but these are the two ones that I've sort of. The other ones can be excluded. When you sort of start poking at it, you can very easily unravel them. So these are the two that I think are the least unravelable, if that is even a word, right? The one is that we fetch a Galakrond from a different timeline. So we go to one of the previous timelines, we fetch that Galakrond, so much like we did with Gul'dan, and we bring that Galakrond into our timeline. This has been done before, it can happen again. The other, and this is the one that I would actually like to see, is that, so this comes down to the whole, where do dragons go when they die? We had this discussion during the week. In one of the videos, I actually had a giant discussion about this, so I won't recap everything. But right now, there is a massive amount of problems within the lore about where dragons die. Before Shadowlands, the sort of accepted truth was that dragons go into the Emerald Dream to Ganir upon their deaths. This was the truth, sort of kind of by reading between the lines, because the Titans suggested that this is where dragons go when they die. Upon their deaths, they go to Ganir and they become wisps or wisp-like spirits that then protect Azeroth from within the dream. So dragons are not tied to the cycle, as it were. Shadowlands then came and really threw that theory through a loop, because suddenly the question became, well, but okay, so since Ysera went to Ardenweald, does that now mean that dragons do actually form part of the cycle? So do dragons actually go into the Shadowlands? This was made even worse by Ian and sort of Denuzer saying that the Shadowlands we see is only a fraction of the true Shadowlands. So there are other realms in the Shadowlands that we didn't visit. So we couldn't even say, well, we didn't see any dragons in the Shadowlands, therefore, they don't go there, because, well, they could just be going to a different afterlife, right? One of the afterlives that we didn't go to. So this made it really difficult. The truth of it is, outside of Ysera, we truly didn't see a dragon, and the deal that all of the Ardenweald, the denizens of Ardenweald, made about Ysera suggested that they had never seen a dragon before. This was their first time encountering a dragon, and they were sort of taken aback by the beauty and the radiance of Ysera, the Lifebinder. Not the Lifebinder, the Dreamweaver. So it was a giant moment for them because this is the first time. So we can reasonably assume that dragons at least don't go to Ardenweald. And I believe that Dragonflight then sort of answered that by simply going, all right, when we went back to Ardenweald, to the Winter Queen, to ask for Ysera back, there was a green dragon that wanted to offer up his life in exchange for Ysera. And the Winter Queen said, no. Your kind does not belong here. So I can't take you. You're not a fair exchange. Malfurion has to offer up his life instead. To me, I think that's reasonable enough, considering all of the other bits and pieces of evidence we have to suggest that dragons most certainly do not go into the Shadowlands, at least from what we know. And this thing suggests...
At least not naturally.
And we also know that the only reason Ysera ended up in Ardenweald was a direct interference by Elune. So this suggests to me Elune had to interfere, because if she didn't, Ysera would have gone to to the Emerald Dream, to Ganir, and not to Ardenweald, and so it wouldn't have helped. Ysera's presence there would not have helped, and that was Elune's way of trying to help. If this is true, if my theory is correct, this means that Galakrond lies somewhere within the Emerald Dream. His soul, at least, is somewhere within the Emerald Dream. We know in World of Warcraft that souls can be reanimated. We've seen necromancy before, and since Galakrond was a being of decay, it would not be hard to do it. His skeleton, for all these years, is still preserved, right? His skeleton is still perfectly preserved, right where it fell in the first place. So he could absolutely be reanimated. And this brings me to the Rift of Arm. Malfurion suggests that this is the deepest evil he's ever encountered. In fact, it's so corrupt that it scares him, and he decides to seal the rift rather than even try to take care of the corruption. What could possibly be that corrupt? Well, a world-sized fucking
an incarnate
dragon.
Of decay.
Yeah, world-sized dragon could be that corrupt, right? It is possible.
Yeah, definitely. I think also, like, when we see the corruption at the end of the Emerald Nightmare raid, I think that kind of links. So that kind of makes quite a lot of sense. And I think that leads quite nicely into the quickfire question I have to kind of finish up, which is, obviously you talked about the kind of swap between Ysera and Malfurion, and looking at some of your past videos, you've said about how powerful Malfurion is. Do you think that swap was worth it? Because Ysera at the moment hasn't actually done anything spectacular, and for me, I feel like it was a massive waste. You've got the most, as you said, Malfurion is one of the most powerful beings on Azeroth, and we've just kind of given him up, which seems really
all right
dumb.
So this is not actually as short a question as you think it is, since the answer is actually quite deep, which I love, by the way, so don't worry about it. All right, so Malfurion has always been a massive problem for Blizzard. From a writing perspective, Malfurion is what you would refer to as a game breaker, right, or a story breaker. The reason for it is too powerful. If you truly show...
Yeah, he's a god in his own right.
If you truly show the power of Malfurion, well, none of the problems exist. Oh, the Burning Legion is here. Well, let's just call Malfurion. Wake him up. He quickly takes care of the Burning Legion. Done. No problem. Right? So he becomes like a giant sort of... what do you do with this character? The only way you can really enjoy his character is by weakening him. The only way you can really include his character is by weakening him and making him seem not as strong as he actually is. Because people who've never read any books about World of Warcraft will look at Malfurion and go, he just sleeps the whole time and he doesn't do fuck. But then you read the books about Malfurion and you realize this dude is not just a little strong, he's a literal god. This guy can actually make Azeroth do things to you. and there's no way that you would ever be able to stop it. The battle between Malfurion and Sylvanas, they had to actively weaken Malfurion in order for that battle to actually take place. Because if they showcased
he would have tore
if they showcased Malfurion in his true form, right? I don't care how much power Sylvanas had from Zuval. Malfurion simply drags her into the core of Azeroth. What do you do then, right? All this power from Zuval, you can blast him with a bolt the same way you did with Sourfang, but you're now in the core of Azeroth, so good luck getting out of there, right? That's the power that he has. So Malfurion, they had to get rid of him. They had to find a way to just sort of get him out of the way, right?
To give you to go back to the War of the Ancients. So Magtheridon is the first demon to set foot in Ajara's palace when Sargeras starts to send his supporters over. And Magtheridon stabilizes the portal and also calls on the Huntsmaster, Hakar. I think it might be Hakar, but it's weird because he's also named after the Blood Loa.
Yeah.
But anyway, Magtheridon is terrified of Malfurion, and that's why he sends the Houndmaster after him. He doesn't want to go after him himself.
Yeah.
He's hoping the Houndsmaster will get lucky. He knows that Fellhounds devour magic and hopes that's going to give him the edge, because this guy, the boss of the Pit Lords, is terrified of what Malfurion can do.
So Malfurion was a giant problem for World of Warcraft, for Blizzard. The writers, what do you do with this character? You kind of just have to, sort of like Madan. Luckily, with Madan, it was a character that always sort of existed on the fringes, and so they just decided not to include it in the main lore, because Malfurion is effectively Madan. So I think that's one of the reasons they sort of got rid of Malfurion, just moved them into Ardenweald. With Ysera's storyline, to answer the second part of your question, Ysera's storyline is only just beginning. This is one of the masterful things of World of Warcraft Dragonflight, which makes me super happy to finally be a World of Warcraft player. They're taking their time with the story in a way that they've never done previously. Every patch, and literally every patch, we deal with a small part of the Dragonflight story. Just enough to sort of move the story forward, but not so much that it feels like it's just rushed towards the end. It really feels like they're taking their time. They're leaving enough time for things to build and for things to sort of progress. Right now, the Green Dragonflight is doing the same thing that all of the flights are doing. They're trying to figure out their place within the universe, like within this new era, and they're trying to get their aspectral powers back. Ysera is still trying to come to terms with her new position and what exactly that position will be, because the last time we heard from Ysera, she knows that being touched by death means that she can no longer be the Dreamweaver, but she's not entirely sure where else she should fit into. Now, I think this is going to be Blizzard's way of including a champion of Elune in its truest form, because it makes sense. Ysera has always favored the Night Elves. The Night Elves have always served Elune. If Ysera became the icon of Elune, which I think she's going to be, it plays so into her character in so many different ways. That I can definitely see Ysera being almost part of a new flight that's born, right? So the flight of Elune, so to speak, rather than, just the flights that we have now. That's something that I'm really looking forward to, and I do think that story is going to play itself out. I kind of expect 10.2 to maybe have small bumps towards Ysera's storyline. And then ultimately, I think Ysera's true storyline will only start in 11.0, 11.1. That's where I think we'll start really diving into Ysera's story. Since we now know, right? Steve Denuser have made this very clear in his interview with Preach. They're no longer taking that approach, the sort of D&D one-shot approach, where every expansion needs to tell its story and finish its story within the single expansion. And usually the only thing they'll do is they'll leave a couple of breadcrumbs for the next expansion in the expansion. Now they're looking at expansions more as a chapter within a book. And, you know, if anyone that's ever read a book will know that a chapter doesn't finish a story. A chapter simply builds a story. And you can have multiple chapters building the same story over time. And I think that's where we're headed with the story. We have so many hooks. There's no way all of those hooks can be finished in Shadowlands, in Dragonflight. It's impossible. Think about all of the open threads that we have right now. We have Galakrond, Vernoth, and Farak, right? Those are the same thread insofar as it's in Connats, but it's 3 different threads because they're not the same goals, especially now with Farak also being influenced by Shadowflame. What's that going to do? Because that might take him in a whole new direction. Now with the Galakrond being in the time ways and sort of being part of some Galakrond storyline, that is a whole new thread that's just been opened up. We then have the thread of the aspects trying to regain their aspectral powers. We have the thread of the Black Dragonflight trying to figure out who the hell is going to lead them and also want to become aspectral aspects again. You have the Maruk that have their own storyline. You have the Blue Dragonflight that has a massive storyline, not just for aspects, but also where are the other blue dragons? Because they're nowhere to be found. You have Ysera storyline that's open and sort of waiting to happen. You have Marithra's storyline and how she's going to become the aspect. You have a giant civil war potentially waiting within the Black Dragonflight. You have the Jordan storyline that's opened up. That is probably so. There's so many stories currently in Dragonflight. There's no way a single expansion deals with all of those stories. It's mathematically not possible. So it's sort of probably like more than 70% of all those stories is going to carry into the next expansion. You know, whatever the next expansion might be.
And that's what I like about Dragonflight. I think from vanilla to Dragonflight, we've kind of been on one linear storyline. I know there's been lots of stories in that, but I think this expansion has allowed for new things to be discovered. And I agree with you in the sense of if you don't read the books, and obviously watching you made me kind of get some of those books and read through them. You're told like 30% of the story. Like Malfurion in the game, he seems really underpowerful. Xavius, he was defeated. Sylvanas, and reading those books, like to anyone who wants to, 100% do it, because it just changes your entire outlook on the entire game. But no, so thank you.
So true. And I'm glad that you started reading it because of me, because the WoW books, as much hate as they get, and sometimes they get the hate that they deserve, because it is true, sometimes Blizzard purposefully leaves stories out of the game that was required for the game to make sense, just so that they can put them into the books. You know, Shadowlands was once again a good example of this. If you read the Sylvanas book, it actually does so much to make you actually not hate Zuval as a character, because it explains a lot more about what Zuval is up to and why he is what he is. Not entirely, but it does do more than what the game does. But for the most part, the WoW books are also really good, right? Because a lot of the books, especially things like, for example, Dawn of the Aspects, War of the Ancients, these books dive into so much more detail about the actual events and how those events played out in a way that maybe to some extent the games can't always, because people would just get bored, you know. But you know, it is what it is. We have to hope that whatever the book is going to be for Dragonflight is going to be an additive to the story rather than a subtraction of the story.
100%. Yeah. And I think that's it. No, thank you. I really appreciate you taking the time to answer more questions.
Absolutely. Mubandu, thank you so much for the question. Really appreciate that. And if you have more questions, please, as always, next week, same time, same place. So very happy to have you here, bro.
Yeah, no, thank you. Thanks, guys. I'll let the next person jump in.
Thank you very much. Take care of yourself, bro.
Yeah, you too. Bye-bye.